This is Sam Kirby, host of Cinema Stories. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
This is Kim Meyer, the host of Choose to Rise here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Choose to Rise, where we talk about living with positive mindsets, how to increase our confidence, building our faith, and living out our life on purpose. A new show comes out via podcast every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And if you want to catch the episode live instead, stop by Public House Media around 6:45 Central Standard Time, Monday, Wednesday, Friday as well. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you'll never miss an episode of Choose to Rise. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Welcome to How to Write Good. I'm your host, Daniel Poppy. You can find out more about me at danielpoppy.com. Poppy is spelled P-O-P-P-I-E, and as always, I'm never going to tell you how to spell Daniel. Actually, I think I already did. I believe that I already told you the trick to doing it, but I can't really remember because I don't have that good of a memory. Am I too far away right now? That's the question. So, we are back in... Oh, I got to do the rest of my stuff. So this podcast is brought to you by Public House Media. You can check them out on Facebook or at thephmedia.com. Also, I am getting back into... I've got to apologize if you... Well, I think I'm... To a certain degree, I think that if anybody reads things that I put out on my blog, I think that I have a responsibility to put stuff out consistently. I've gotten out of practice. So the last one I put out, I think it was on a Russian artist, I believe. And since then, I haven't really put one out. And the reason why I didn't put one out is because I went on vacation, so I think that was a good reason at first, but then that was at the beginning of August, the second week of August or something like that. So I've actually tried to, I actually started a class that's takes a lot of my time up since the middle of August, and I've been trying to get all that class done, and it takes most of my day up, so trying to get to other stuff is difficult. But at the same time, I think I should keep that up because, first of all, I really like art. That's why I blog about art. I'm sick of blogging about just things I think about. That's why I do this podcast. So instead of actually having to write about it and take my time, I can just talk and not take my time. So you know what kind of quality information you're getting here. No, I actually think about what I'm going to say, but it's easier to talk than write. That's why most people talk and they don't write. So I haven't been doing that. I'm trying to get back up into the saddle, get back into the habit of doing it. I have one person one artist who's smaller, who's trying to get out and kind of do art full time and isn't yet, that I plan on doing that I think is really cool, that does a lot of drawing. And there's another one that does actually abstract art, which I'm not the biggest fan of abstract art usually, but when I run into abstract art I usually like it a lot. So we are going to get back into our word of the week. I'm glad that Clint could come on last week. I think it's cool just having someone on who's not an author. Like he is a writer. He is an author because he's written a book, but he's not published yet. And I think that's really cool just to talk about that and go back and forth because I think that can be more helpful. And at the same time, there's value from people who are still in the process. I think that people who are past the process probably forget about what the process is like, and they think of it differently. One thing that I guess I'm a published author because I have a book out, but at the same time, I'm not a big author. I'm not somebody who makes all my money off of writing. I actually make like pretty much nothing off of writing. I think that when you're in that situation, you're looking at it realistically, you have a different viewpoint, and I'm trying to learn from those things a lot. So we're going to jump into our word of the week, and then we're going to get into the accidental essence and then the logical fallacy, just like usual. At the end of this month, I actually have an English author who writes horror lined up. So hopefully we're able to get that in. He does live in England, so it might be hard, but I think that's going to be a really, really interesting discussion, really interesting conversation for the podcast. So the word of the week is consonants. So there are a few different things in poetry. This is actually from a class I'm in right now. I'm in a Shakespeare class, and I have to find this a lot, and it's kind of annoying to find. So consonants, so there's alliteration, which most people know. Alliteration is when consonant sounds sound the same. Then there is assonance, I think you say it like that, where the vowel sounds sound the same. It isn't a rhyme, so slant and Band-Aid have the same A sound in them. Ant, and-aid, stuff like that. Now, consonants is when the end of a word sounds similar, or the word kind of rhymes. It's a partial rhyme. It has the same sound, but it doesn't have the same vowel sound. And it's not alliteration. So I'm going to give you a few examples of it so you can get this. So the word and Lord are consonants. So it's spelled Consonance. So it's not consonants with a TS. It's CNCE, which I guess it doesn't really matter. There's blood, food, and good. They all look the same, but they sound different. But you also have stuff like river and ever, or heaven and given. So they look similar. They have these similar aspects of the structure, but they have a different sound. That's called the consonants. I actually really like when I run into those. They're a little harder to see. So we're going to jump into our accidental lessons, and our accidental lessons is, since I'm taking this class on Shakespeare, I've been thinking a lot about Shakespeare, and Shakespeare is held in high regard in the literary world. That goes without saying, correct? I'm going to say we're going to be talking about what I have coined, because I'm the only one who actually I'm sure there's somebody else thinking about it, but I'm the only one talking to myself about it, as you can tell. So I'm calling it the Shakespeare Effect. So I've been reading Shakespeare, and I'm going to give you a few facts about him, and not about him in general, but just about his writing. So the funny thing, and I was thinking about this yesterday because I had to read Othello, and what I've been doing is I've actually been watching it. And the reason I've been watching it is because it's a play, right? So it's meant to be watched. It's meant to be on the stage. There's a difference between reading a play and watching a play. You need it acted out to get the full effect. So I watch Shakespeare's plays, and you can get them for free because everybody and his mother, or her mother, their mother does Shakespeare at some point, especially actors. Actors seem to think Shakespeare is unbelievable. Like, they're like, Shakespeare is so good, and if I say, now I'm just insulting actors, if I say Shakespeare, I'm intelligent, which doesn't make you intelligent, because I can quote whoever I want, and it doesn't make me intelligent. Quoting people doesn't make you intelligent. Now, being able to take their ideas and synthesize them with something else or another idea, that probably makes you intelligent. So one thing you should know about Shakespeare. So I'm watching Othello. I have to go back. I'm watching Othello because I watch stuff and I don't read it because it's a play, right? And it has Spanish subtitles. Now, what most people don't know about Shakespeare is he stole his plots. So Shakespeare, this is what I imagine him being like. I think he's like, I like playing with language. That's pretty fun. And everybody can see that Shakespeare plays with language in his work, right? And he's like, but I don't want to come up with a plot. I just want to write. I don't have to worry about a plot. So what he does is he finds another play. He's like, I think I can do better than that. So pretty much all his plays stole the plot, stole the story from another place. Now, the reason why I was thinking, why is this in Spanish, is that if you read Shakespeare in another language, you are not reading Shakespeare. You are because Shakespeare is the words. Shakespeare is the actual words. And you're just getting a plot. You're getting words that are kind of translated, but it's not the same effect. Actually, I think this about most books. So if you read a book in another language, you're getting the story, but you're not getting the actual book. The book only can exist in one language, unless, I would say the same thing, because the author would have to write it in a different language. I don't consider translations the exact same thing. So if you are reading Shakespeare in Spanish, you should just be like, forget about it, because you're not getting all of Shakespeare, because Shakespeare stole his stuff. So Othello was ripped off from an Italian play. Hamlet, I believe, was from an English play. I think King Lear was as well. I don't know if he came up with any of his plots. I'd have to look into that. But most of his stuff was just like, hey, I like that. Let's grab it. Let's rewrite it. And then people say, his genius comes from the fact that he used specific words, or he wove things together within the plot in a different way. But I really don't consider the story his. I'm sure there are people out there who are like, I think you're wrong. Okay, you can certainly argue with me. I'm not a Shakespeare scholar, but I do have stuff to say about him. So, and I think that it's a valid criticism of Shakespeare, and I think that one of the issues I have, I don't mind Shakespeare himself. I think that some of his writing is a little full of himself, if you read it, and I think he's indulgent. So here's something really interesting. when you run into the writing world, I made this podcast, and the reason I made this podcast is because the writing world thinks you have to do things all a specific way. They have these specific rules. One of the rules is that you cannot have flourishes in your writing. You are not allowed to have flourishes in your writing. I've had people say things to me about my book, like it's like your language is too flowery. Now, if you look at Shakespeare, his language is quite flowery, right? One of the things in the writing world that you're not supposed to do is be self-indulgent. You're not supposed to be self-indulgent. So if something comes to your mind or you're saying something in a clever way, you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to say it in a very basic, straightforward way. The funny thing about that is Shakespeare is seen as the best English writer of all time. I think that's... I don't think that goes without saying. I think that is an assumption. I think that's an assumption that's never been explained to me. I've never run into someone who has given me a good reason why Shakespeare is the best. It's always just an assumption. So Shakespeare is the number one, and I'm going to get to the Shakespeare Effect that I said before. Shakespeare is the number one. You just need this information first. Shakespeare is the number one writer in the English language. Shakespeare is indulgent. Shakespeare is indulgent, okay? I don't know how you could argue that he isn't. Now, you may say, well, he's so good, he's allowed to be indulgent, but he is indulgent in how he writes. He's like, I like how this sounds, so I'm going to write it that way. Ooh, I have this clever way to say something, so I'm going to write it that way. The funny thing is that every writer is indulgent. Every writer is writing something that he or she... I'll use he because I'm male, and I usually think that if you're talking about a generic person, just use your own gender. I think that a writer, when he writes, is indulgent because otherwise he's first of all, it's usually pleasurable to write, and you want to find the best words. And if you write it all, I think you should be like, well, what's the best way to say this? And the best way, you shouldn't keep everything you write because it's not the best thing to put in there. You should cut stuff out. But the best way a lot of times is very indulgent. The writer's like, yeah, that's really, really good. Man, look at what I did. Yeah, I came up with that idea. That's really cool. Look at how I wove these storylines together. Look at the irony I put into this plot. And so the literary world wants you to mimic Shakespeare. The literary world does not want you to be indulgent. The literary world does not want you to have writing flourishes or anything like that. So they want you to mimic Shakespeare. But they don't... No. Wait, let me rephrase that. They want Shakespeare to be the best, but they don't want you to... They do not want you to mimic the best. Okay. So that's what I've been thinking. And again, if you like Shakespeare, I don't mind. I think there's a lot of cool stuff that he does, and he is very poetic in his language. I think that he probably is one of the best writers in the English language. Okay. At the same time, the language he is writing in is different than what the language we use today. So if we were to say Shakespeare is the best writer in the English language, which I don't know if he is, I don't know if he isn't, but if we were to say that, you can't really do a comparison, okay? The reason why you can't do the comparison is because the language has changed so stinking much. Shakespeare is almost to the point where we are not able to understand him. Every 500 years or so, Shakespeare is writing in the 1600s, so it's going to be another 100 years, I believe, 50, 60 years. Every 5 years or so, the language changes so much you cannot understand the language of 500 years past. So since Shakespeare is writing 1616, I think some of his last books, I can't remember exactly. I'm not going to do the research right now, but it's around that time. It's after the Reformation. It's after people came to the New World, like barely. They just discovered the New World, and Shakespeare is writing, I believe. And you can check me on that. And if I'm wrong, you can tell me the dates are wrong or whatever it is. But it's sometime around that time period, late 1500s, early 1600s. Shakespeare is almost another language, and sure, you can read him, and you can see the cool things he does, and certainly in the books he writes, he weaves things together in ways that are cool, like he has layer upon layer upon layer upon layer, but you can't look at him, and you can't compare him to, say, Ernest Hemingway, because they are completely different things. It's like comparing a movie to a video game almost. A movie that is really good, you can say, oh, this movie is extremely good, but you can't say this movie is the best video game that ever existed. And that's kind of what's happening. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's also the same thing with other languages. So you can't say, oh, this Spanish book is the best book that's ever been written in the world, because the criteria for judging that book is in the context of Spanish. Okay, there might be another book that is from another language that is the best book in that language, and somebody might say that's the best book as well, but we can't compare them because there's different things we have to use. The language adds to what you're able to do. If you say, oh, this Spanish book is so good because look at the rhymes and look at the rhythm and everything like that, and you're saying this Spanish book is better than this English book, you can't do that, because Spanish is a naturally more rhythmic. Every language is rhythmic, but Spanish is a very flowing language. It has a back and forth between the vowel sounds and the consonants and different things like that. It flows. It has consonant vowel, and so on and so forth. So it's going to be written differently. It's going to be used differently. And I guess I'm getting to the point right here with this. It's going to be used differently than the English language. The English language is harsher. I think that people would agree with that. It doesn't have this same vowel, consonant flow that Spanish does. And because of that, you have to write it differently. You have to treat it differently. Now, Shakespeare is not as more similar to Spanish, but it did have a better flow. What you should do, and maybe I'll post it up. I think I'll have it in the show notes. How did Shakespeare talk? And then you'll see how much more rhythmic it was. It's more similar, it seems, to the Gaelic languages than it is to modern English. It almost seems like that. I'm just writing this down so I don't forget. Otherwise, I will. So you're comparing one almost completely different language. We can still understand it to another. So, and I don't think you can do that. I think you can compare English in the modern world to the different ones. I think you can compare especially British English and American English. I think they're probably really one of the closest to, and they probably flow the best in comparison to one another. But there are differences at the same time, and you still have to take them into context. Okay. So the funny thing about the literary world is Shakespeare's a rock star, right? And this is where I'm getting to the Shakespeare effect. Shakespeare is a rock star. Shakespeare is... So you are a nerd. Let's just say you are a nerd. And you really, really, really like Battlestar Galactica. Because everybody likes The Office. Everybody likes Dwight. Dwight likes Battlestar Galactica. Therefore, you are a nerd and you like Battlestar Galactica. And you study Battlestar Galactica a lot. And you're like, man, look at what they did with this story. Look at how they wove this plot. I've never seen all Battlestar Galactica, so I don't really know. Look at how they wove this plot through the entire story. Look at what they did in what they did with this character. Look at the changes in this character. Or you could just pick whatever other thing. You're a super nerd, and you really, really like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because that's a thing now, right? And you're like, look at how, and you intently study this Marvel Cinematic Universe, and you are convinced that the people who are making this are geniuses, complete and utter geniuses, because they have so much stuff going on, and they have layer upon layer upon layer of meaning, and they sneak in these Easter eggs and different things like that, and they have shown the audience, or someone careful enough to study it, that they've put in tons of time to make that thing awesome. Which I'm kind of sick of superhero movies, but I would probably say that, okay, if you look at it close enough, they put in a lot of time and they've really thought about how they put these things together. I think that actually they probably think about how they put these things together more than DC movies. The whole of it, the whole entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, I think is put together better than DC movies, and there's a video on it that argues that that's the case because of character development within those Marvel movies. So that is what happens with Shakespeare. So Shakespeare is considered the best English writer of all time. So what happens? You have these nerds. They're academics. So they're not seen as nerds. Well, I would say they're nerds. They are academics. And since they have PhDs, and since they really, really like Shakespeare, people take them more seriously, because if you have a PhD, even if you're spewing crap, people take you more seriously because you have 3 extra letters behind your name, or wherever you want to put those letters. So what happens is you get a book. I'm holding Hamlet because I like a prop. you get a book, and I've got a few of these. I've got The Merchant of Venice. I've got Hamlet. You take Hamlet, for instance, is what you do is you scour Hamlet, and you try to find all the artistic things within Hamlet. Now, the difference between you and Shakespeare is that when Shakespeare sat down to write, I don't know how fast he wrote it, but what he could do is he could list all the different things he wanted, and this is what I do, and I'm trying to demystify writing. I'll talk about that some other time. I won't have time today. What he did is he's like, I'm gonna steal my story first of all. I'm gonna steal my plot line, but he can write down the exact things he wants to happen or how he wants to tie everything together, and he can be like, okay, what are my themes? What are these ideas? I don't know if he called them themes, but he's like, what are these ideas that I'm gonna weave into the story? Because I'm sure he did this. Or I'm almost certain he did this. I don't think he just wrote. I think he thought about what he was writing and how he was going to tie everything together. And he's like, oh, Hamlet, I want to have. And I can't remember Hamlet enough. It was too fast going through. But he's like, I want to have ideas of revenge in here, but I also want ideas of insanity. Like, he's going mad. I'm gonna have him go mad. That's really cool. I like that idea. I like the idea of having this mad character. But I could have other people go mad. So I can make Ophelia. I think that's her name. Ophelia could go mad. And are there any other instances of revenge that I could have in here? And what he does is you can list what you can do as a writer. You can list about 16 different things that you want to connect to one idea. And then you can list those things. You can connect them to 3 other ideas as well. And when you're writing them, it doesn't take that much because you're taking little bits and pieces and you're putting them together. What people think happens in the writing process is that the writer, some people do this. Some people just sit down and they write, which I think is kind of insane. And maybe they're just better than me. Some people sit down and write, but they still do revising. Okay, so they do think about what they do. So what happens in the writing process, even I think if you just sit down and write, is that you go over something and you're dealing with one little detail at a time. And you've got these bigger ideas in your head you're connecting everything to. It's not as if you're dealing with 16 different ideas, because most people can't deal with 16 different ideas at once. It's not as if you write it all in one go. You go over it again, you fix it, you tie things together, you change things, you edit, you revise. It's a very mundane process. But what people do is they read Shakespeare and they find all these different things that Shakespeare meant to happen or tie together. And what I think happens, and I think this would happen with any piece of literature you take so seriously as Shakespeare, what I think happens is they find things he never meant to be tied together. Okay, I think that he meant a lot of things to be tied together. When I do my own writing, I want a lot of things tied together. So the book I have out now, The Ninth Hour, it's the beginning of a series. And when you look back at the series, I want people to see, oh, that's tied to that, it's tied to that, it's tied to that. But not absolutely everything is not tied to absolutely everything else, because it's 90,000 words. That's a lot of words to tie together. So people, I think, draw things out of Shakespeare, or they assume he's doing something he's not. And he's kind of functioning, especially with his rhythm and with his rhyme. I think how he functions is he's trying to find the best sound, the best words to say things, and he's not necessarily trying to be like, this is exactly what I'm doing. But people take it like that. So they actually build him up to be more than he is. So this is the Shakespeare effect. Shakespeare, I don't know if he's the best English writer. Is he one of the best? I'm not even sure about that. I'd have to do a really, really in-depth study, but there's never been information given to me. Nobody's ever actually explained this is why he is the best, and you really need to explain why he is the best, because writing and reading is very subjective. Most people in the United States, most people in the English-speaking world do not like Shakespeare anymore, and the reason why they don't like Shakespeare is because it's almost a different language. They cannot understand Shakespeare, and frankly, it's boring. And one of the reasons why it's boring is because it's another language, but a lot of it is boring because it's a completely different aesthetic. It's a completely different storytelling aesthetic than we have now. But the academic world says Shakespeare is the best. It's to the point where you have to convince someone, because before it was the case that we have all these specific rules that people follow, that you're like, these are the different things you need to be a success in writing, and that's what I'm pushing against in this podcast. And people are saying, well, Shakespeare is the best, study Shakespeare, you're going to be better. They also, like I said before, they contradict themselves and say don't be indulgent, but they've liked Shakespeare so much, they've latched onto him so much, that instead of I can't remember what I was going to say. Instead of actually studying or instead of actually making a argument for what makes him good, they've just assumed it. Now, what this does in the literary world, I seriously think this is the case, and you can totally disagree with me. I think that most people do not actually like Shakespeare. I think that a lot of people who say they like Shakespeare, because I don't like Shakespeare. The best play I've seen of him is Othello. I don't like Shakespeare because it just grates against my modern ear. Okay, and I'm not a bad writer. I don't think I'm a bad. You can certainly say I'm a bad writer. That's your opinion, but I mean, compared to the average person, I'm above average in writing. Okay, it grates against the modern ear, and I think what happens is people say you must like Shakespeare if you are a writer. You must like Shakespeare if you are in the theater. You must see him as genius if you are in this area. And what happens is people say, well, I have to see him as genius, and they don't necessarily feel pressured to see him as a genius. Well, there's a pressuring. I'll explain the pressuring. What happens is somebody comes in, they're a freshman in college, or they're a sophomore, whenever they start their English degree, or whenever they start their theater degree, because they probably read a lot of Shakespeare in theater. It almost was at the point where I was about to swear by accident. It kind of sounded like it was coming out that way. And then they read Shakespeare, and their professors are like, Shakespeare is the best in the world. Shakespeare is unbelievable. If you want to be better, you should read Shakespeare, because only the highly intellectual understand Shakespeare. So what people do, what these 19, 20-year-olds who aren't very old, who just got out of high school, put it in context, do is they're like, well, if I'm smart, I must like Shakespeare. Like, I've got to like Shakespeare if I'm smart. So they kind of make themselves like Shakespeare. And you can do this because there's a lot of people who like coffee, and coffee is bitter. And generally it is an acquired taste. Now, I'm not saying some people just don't pick up a cup of coffee and say, that tastes good. But for most people, your first cup is probably not, you probably didn't like it first, right? It took a while to like it. And then you're like, well, Dan, aren't you arguing in favor of people liking Shakespeare? It is not a mark of high intelligence that you think Shakespeare is fantastic. It's not a mark of high intelligence if you can look in a book and you can find aspects of alliteration, assonance, irony, or anything like that, because you're just reading and you're finding different things. Back to what I said before, a mark of high intelligence is being able to take different ideas and synthesize them. It's not just about finding things. There's more to it than that. And people think, especially college students, especially people in the English arena, and I'm sorry if I offend somebody, I think there's certainly people who do like Shakespeare for various reasons. But I think I'll explain why I don't think most people do, even people in the English area. But they think they have to be intelligent, so they say, oh, I like Shakespeare, and eventually they do like Shakespeare, but it's just because they've fooled themselves into thinking they actually like it. Now, if they were honest with themselves, if they took a step back, if they listened to a Shakespearean play, if they actually saw a play and they were honest, they weren't so filled up with this idea that he was the best ever and he should be viewed as a complete and utter genius, then they would probably say, no, I really don't like how it sounds, because it doesn't sound good to the modern ear. It's hard to listen to it. They're like, I don't like it how it sounds. His plots aren't very good. The only thing he's got going for him is if you read it, you see, oh yeah, he's got a lot of aspects of poetic language. He has a lot of cool poetic language that he puts together, and he has a lot of things that connect together in his plays, which I don't think is necessarily the mark of a genius. So that is the Shakespeare effect, that people aren't actually drawn to Shakespeare as a person, as a writer anymore. Maybe they were in the past. And since they're not drawn to him as a writer, you're kind of shoved into Shakespeare. You're kind of shoved into it, and you trick yourself into thinking you like Shakespeare. Now, this can be applied in a broader context. With this Shakespeare effect, you can make someone famous. What you can do is, if you like a book, you can tell whoever you know that you like the book, and you can point out all these genius things in the book. You can take whatever book you want. You can be like, look at what this author does. Oh, this author does this here, and look at how all this ties together. And it can be any type of book. Or you could take a children's book. You could pop open Dr. Seuss, and he'd be like, man, look at like the rhyme scheme of this, and like it's so simplistic. Or look at his and I really like Dr. Seuss because it's just so stinking bizarre. But you could say, look at how he draws the figures and how simple they are, and it's just the essence of what you need to convey what he's trying to convey and the whimsy of it all. And you can take somebody who doesn't like Dr. Seuss, and you can start making them think maybe there's more to Dr. Seuss. This is why back to art, because I always think and talk about art. This is why the artistic community pretty much puts up a lot of trash in the museums. There's some modern art that is fantastic. I'm not going to argue against that. There's a lot of abstract art coming out that I think is cool. There's a lot that isn't. There was a artistic piece that looked like a trash can with like ribbons around it. And maybe I will find this. Trash can art piece. I have no idea what it's called. And a cleaning person picked it up and put it in the trash. Or I think it looked like a trash can. But a cleaning person picked up this thing they thought was trash, but it was an art piece, and they put it in the trash, which I think is phenomenal. And what's happened in that world, too, is that people have said something so good that it isn't so. They're like, this is phenomenal. This is so brave. This is so profound. And they've tricked people who at first would be like, what is that? Like, I don't think that's profound or brave or cool or aesthetically beautiful. That's really ugly, and it looks like they took 2 seconds. And they make it into something it's not. And because of that, the people who are like, well, the artistic community is really intelligent. These people are there's this word Gnosticism, and a lot of people probably know what this word means, but it means hidden knowledge. And people in the artistic community function as if they have hidden knowledge about what they're reading or what they're explaining. Now, in 60 to 100 years or something like that, Shakespeare will, or maybe 200 years, I'm not sure the exact timeline. In about that amount of time, Shakespeare is going to be a completely different language. People aren't going to be able to read Shakespeare. They're going to actually have to learn Middle English to read Shakespeare. And when they do that, there's going to actually be hidden knowledge that you need, because you're going to need a different language. But it's still not going to make it good. Right now, I mean, if you study it a lot, you probably can see more and more things that happen with it, but you might be tricking yourself, okay? So that's what I've got for this week. I guess I'm gonna tell you about this. So I don't know if this is gonna happen, but I'm just going to say it right now, just in case it does. So I've had this idea in my mind. If you don't know already, there is something called November is National Writers Month. I can't remember. It's NaNoWriMo is the shortened version. National Writers Wait, I can't remember. And people try to write a book. National Novel Writing Month. That's what it is. People try to write a book in a month. And I've never done it before. And if I have time, I want to write a book, and I want to get it published in a month. And it's going to be a really, really difficult thing. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I don't know if I can actually do it. But I'm in a weird position where I might actually have the time to just sit down and do it. And I may actually do it. I'll give you more information on whether I will be able to, or whether I'm going to have to be able to clear enough time in November to do it and actually get a book from the single idea through publication. But I may actually do that. What I do with it, and I guess I'll tell everybody, is I would put a video out a day and just and I would just tell people what my process is. I'd be like, this is what I have to do today, and this is what is going on, and this is where I am with my plan. And the reason why I'm doing it, one of the reasons is I want a challenge. I want a challenge to try to actually write a good book in a month, because I think it's doable. I think it's a difficult thing to get everything done within a month, but I think it is doable. But at the same time, it goes back to this Gnosticism, this hidden knowledge. And I don't think I'm using the word completely correctly, because it's usually associated with religiousness. But there's this idea that people in the artistic community have this hidden knowledge. There's this idea in the writing community. Like I said, I'm pushing against this in this podcast. This whole entire podcast is pushing against this idea, where you are a special person. There's a specific aspect about you that makes you special compared to everybody else, and that makes you gives you the ability to write. Let me tell you this now. So I've been writing a really, really long time in the scheme of my life. I've been writing more time than I've not. Okay, seriously. So I've been seriously writing more time than I have not been writing seriously, in a serious manner. And when I first started, I was awful. Okay, so I am 26 now. So I was 12 when I started. That is 14 years where I've been seriously writing what I've been trying to find the best words I possibly can. So if you read my stuff and you say that, oh, he's really good at writing, or maybe you say he's good at writing, you don't say I'm really good, or you say maybe he knows what he's doing. Maybe he knows what he's doing. The reason why I'm able to write like that is because I've been doing it so stinking long. I think that once you do that, you get into this mindset. There's this idea of 10,000 hours, and I'm going over my time limit, but that's okay. There's this idea of 10,000 hours until you're an expert. I'm pretty sure I put in 10,000 hours. I think it's 10,000 hours. But the reason why I'm doing this is because you look at these writers, and you look at these really high writers. Look at these literary authors, and they wear their berets, and they think they're all artsy, and they think they're part of this special club. And I don't think that. I think that I'm just a normal person who happened to want to create something, who's just been writing and writing and writing, and hopefully create something good. And what I want to do is show everybody else just the daily grind of writing. I want to show you how normal it is, and I want to show you that it isn't as complex. I want to show you that there isn't this special knowledge you have to write a book. You have to be organized. You have to be willing to put in the grind to get the drafts out and everything like that. But it's not this insurmountable obstacle. It's kind of like how somebody would think about a marathon. A marathon's 26.2 miles, I believe. And a lot of people write marathons. And for me, I'm like, man, a marathon is so stinking long. But my brother has run several marathons, and I believe he said this to me. He said it's more of like a mental thing where you get to the point where you can run, and you just have to force yourself to say, I'm going to run this whole entire thing. And that's what writing is. And some of you may be awful at writing, but at the same time, if you keep on practicing at it, I can tell you that if you're trying to write, when you do it, first of all, read your stuff out loud, because you can hear the rhythm of it. You can hear if it makes sense. But when you're trying to write, if you're actually trying to get better at it, I'm pretty sure you're going to get better at it. You may need somebody else to write. You may need to develop your craft. But at the same time, there's a lot of things in my writing that are bad that I'm trying to get better at, and I'm learning too. So everybody's at a different stage. Everybody is learning of a different thing. So we are going to just jump into our fallacy of the week because I'm already over time. So our fallacy of the week is ergo decado, or ergo decido, which means therefore leave, then go off. It's also colloquially known as the traitorous critic fallacy. What it is when somebody criticizes a specific stance or a specific idea somebody has, there's a criticism of the critic saying that, oh, you're motivated because you're not inside this group. So they're not responding to the criticism itself. They're saying, because you're not part of our group, you cannot even talk about this. The critic doesn't see the values or the customs of the group, therefore they aren't even allowed to say anything about it. So that is the traitorous critic fallacy, or therefore leave, then go off fallacy, or the ergo, I think it's decado. So that is something I see a lot. You can apply it to where you see it a lot. Try not to do it. It's not something good. All right, so that's all I've got for you. I've gone over time. I'm really sorry. It's almost 40 minutes. So you got a little extra time in this one. As always, my name is Daniel Poppy, and I think this is How to Write Good.